Hollywood sold the same dream over and over again. The kid who got noticed in the crowd. The kid who took the world by storm. A name in the headlines, a face on the posters, millions of viewers, and they all love you. It's true, all of that happened. It's just that nobody read the fine print in that contract. Because behind every one of those stories is another one. The one they don't show in the trailer. About what happens to the kid when the camera turns off. What the studio takes in return. What the parents do with the money. What the industry does to a person who grew up and stopped being convenient. 10 children, 10 stories, and one system that worked flawlessly for everyone except them. Let's start with the one that, for the first time, forced that system to change something. The boy earned $4 million. He got $6.50 a week. His mother bought fur coats. Imagine, you're 8 years old and you're one of the 5 richest people in California. Not your parents, you. An 8-year-old boy whose face sells chocolate bars, overalls, cap guns, and peanut butter all at the same time. Jackie Coogan was born in 1914 into a family where everyone took the stage. Dad danced, Mom acted, and little John was around from the cradle. But the industry really noticed him by accident. Charlie Chaplin came to an evening show at one of the Los Angeles theaters, and in the corner of the wings stood a 5-year-old boy, moving to the music, copying the adult performers, not because anyone asked him to, but simply because he didn't know how to do otherwise. Chaplin made the decision right there. The result was the film The Kid, released in 1921, the second highest grossing film that season. 6-year-old Coogan alongside Chaplin, and it wasn't some kid gimmick for a promotional poster. It was a movie that made the whole audience cry. Things moved fast after that. 5 films in 2 years. Merchandising that modern standards would envy. Dolls with his face. Peanut butter with his face. Chocolate bars with his face. Literally. By age 8, Jackie Coogan had earned about $4 million. In today's money, that's over $60 million. His allowance was $6.50 a week. That's not a typo. His parents managed everything. His dad, oddly enough, took money seriously. They say he was putting it into a trust fund, planning to save it for his son. And that's an important detail. He actually seemed to intend to. But in 1935, Dad got behind the wheel, drove off a road in San Diego, and never got up. The money went to Mom. Mom soon remarried Arthur Bernstein, the family's financial manager. The duo turned out to be productive. Just not for Jackie. When Coogan demanded an accounting of the $4 million, the answer was simple. There's no money left. Not lost on investments, not it all went into production. Spent. Mink coats, diamonds, fancy cars. Mom later explained this to reporters without a hint of shame. Not a single dollar earned by a child before the age of 21 belongs to the child. It's the parents' money. Jackie won't get a cent. And she was right. According to the law, this is where the real structure reveals itself. Studios filmed kids, made fortunes off them, paid the parents, and no law required that anything at all be set aside for the one who actually earned it. The child was a product. Their face was raw material. Who exactly converted that into fur coats? Legally, it was nobody's business. Coogan tried to sue. The money for lawyers ran out before the case did. He called Chaplin, the very one who'd noticed him in the wings 15 years earlier. Chaplin gave him $1,000 in cash. No questions, no conditions, just handed it over. Out of the $4 million, Coogan got $126,000. After legal fees, his mother and stepfather were not prosecuted. Because the law was on their side. A child earned a fortune, his mother spent it. The law called it normal. In 1939, California passed a law named after Coogan. It required setting aside a portion of a child's earnings in a protected fund. Too late for Jackie, but at least it was something. Though the law only covered 15%, the other 85% parents could still do whatever they wanted with. Dozens of other kids worked in the same system, in those same years, under the same rules. And most of them would never know exactly how much. Jackie Coogan lived a long life. He fought in Burma on military gliders. In the 1960s, he played Uncle Fester on The Addams Family and was beloved by millions again. He died at 69. They say he looked back on the past calmly. But you understand, of course, that calmly is a whole different story. Coogan wasn't the first, just the first who dared to file a lawsuit. Because during those very same years, an English boy with impeccable manners, whom the press called the little gentleman, was going through a similar meat grinder, while the industry methodically tore his family apart piece by piece, right in front of millions. He was sold as the very embodiment of refinement. A little English gentleman with flawless manners, a clear voice, and a face seemingly made for the black and white screen. Freddie Bartholomew arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s when he wasn't even 10. And Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studio understood immediately. Here he is, the perfect boy for a big family picture. Not noisy, not brash, not American. Exactly what was needed. His first big role was David Copperfield, the Dickens adaptation in 1935. Then Little Lord Fauntleroy. Then Captains Courageous with Spencer Tracy. Critics wrote that the boy acted better than most adults. Audiences lined up. His studio contract paid him from $1,000 a week and up. By those standards, utterly indecent money for a child. And this is where it really starts. Freddie wasn't raised by his parents. His Aunt Sissy, Millicent Bartholomew, took him in. She brought him to America. She was there on every set. She fought for guardianship of her nephew when things started spinning. His parents had practically faded out of his life by then, gave the kid to the aunt, and went on with their own lives. But when the money started rolling in, suddenly everyone remembered they had a son. His mother filed a lawsuit, then his father, then an uncle, then another relative. By various estimates, just the immediate family initiated over 20 lawsuits against the boy and his guardian. 20-some cases. Each one required lawyers. Each one cost money. Each one dragged on for months. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a line. The studio collected its money steadily. It stayed out of the family squabbles entirely. Its business was the little gentleman on screen. What happened off camera was officially nobody's concern. As long as the boy smiled into the lens, the conveyor belt kept moving. As long as the conveyor belt moved, nobody asked awkward questions. Most of what Freddie earned went toward defending himself from his own family. Think about that for a moment. A child works. A child stars in hits. The child is the face of the studio. And the money he brings in gets eaten up by lawsuits from people who'd handed him over to his aunt before he was even useful to anyone. Aunt Sissy held on. She fought in court, spent the money, defended them. And in the end, she kept custody. But the price of that victory was written right into the bank statements. When Freddie grew up and his little English aristocrat look stopped working, the studio simply didn't renew his contract. No apologies, no transition plan. He was around 15, awkward age, changing voice, changing face. MGM found another type. The conveyor belt moved on to the next model. Freddie Bartholomew's adult career never happened. Not because he was a bad actor, but because his image was too tightly sewn into childhood, and he couldn't escape it on screen. Neither could the audience, who only remembered the boy. Eventually, he moved to New York and worked in advertising for many years. Quietly, without scandals, without memoirs, he lived a long life and died in the early 1990s. No big confessions, no tell-all interviews. Maybe he was just tired of explaining. The family that abandoned him in childhood came back for the money. The studio took everything he could give at the right age and let him go when it no longer needed him. A boy earned a fortune and spent it defending himself from his own relatives. Only Freddie at least had an aunt who fought for him. In the next story, the child's uncle was in charge. A director. a relative who had a very precise understanding of how to make a 9-year-old boy cry for real. And he used it. 56 curls. Every morning before shooting, her mother wound exactly 56 identical curls. Not roughly, not around. Exactly 56. If one was out of place, it was redone. This wasn't a ritual of love. This was product quality control. By the mid-1930s, Shirley Temple was the main box office draw for 20th Century Fox. Not one of the main ones, the only one. During the Great Depression, she single-handedly kept the studio afloat. 5 films a year, millions in box office revenue, dolls with her face, shampoos with her name, hats with her curls. The whole world wanted a piece of Shirley. Shirley just wanted to play with other kids. But that was still a long way off. It didn't start with a big studio, but much earlier and much more unpleasantly. The first films little Shirley appeared in, and she was around 3 or 4 then, were parodies of adult Hollywood movies. In these short skits, kids portrayed adult characters, politicians, seductresses, soldiers. The lines, costumes, scenes, all were written for an adult audience. Years later, Temple wrote about this in her memoirs and assessed it bluntly. But back then, nobody asked a 4-year-old girl if she liked it. Her mother Gertrude was there on every set, watched the curls, the smile, made sure her daughter looked exactly as she should. Shirley didn't go to regular school, home tutoring right on the studio lot, schedule adjusted to the production plan. No girlfriends, only adult colleagues and adult fans. The studio was her only world. The studio knew it and exploited it. 20th Century Fox made one quiet but very telling move. In official documents, Shirley Temple's birth year was changed. Not 1928, 1929. 1 year, just to keep the little girl image in commercial circulation a little longer. They reduced a child's age on paper to extend the shelf life. Huge money was being made. Only a small part reached Shirley. Her mother was on set. Her father quietly stayed in the background. What ended up in the family budget and what went somewhere else, Temple figured out as an adult. It turned out that of her many years of earnings, only a small portion remained by the time she came of age. But that became known later. Meanwhile, the studio smiled, the press gushed, and it seemed like America's most famous child had it simply wonderful. Around age 12, Shirley ended up at a meeting with a producer from a major studio. According to her own words in her memoirs, one of the men present exposed himself to her right in the office. She laughed. She says she just didn't understand what it was supposed to mean. She was asked to leave the office, not him. This isn't random awkwardness. It's a precise illustration of how protection worked in this industry. The adult with money and connections kept his place. The girl was shown the door. No one to complain to. Smile and leave. This reflex had been honed by years on set. When Shirley grew up, box office returns went down. The image didn't scale. A teenager with curls was a different product, and it sold worse. The studio tried to rebrand. It didn't work. The contract was terminated. Shirley Temple as a commercial asset closed. She got married, then divorced, then married again. Her second marriage was long and happy. Raised children, went into politics, became ambassador first to Ghana, then to Czechoslovakia. She lived 85 years and left behind a respectable biography. All of that was her own story, the one she built herself. But that little girl with 56 curls, whose age the studio lowered on paper and who was raised believing the main thing was to stay in character, she didn't choose any of the conditions she grew up in. In the next story, the child wasn't given a choice either. Only there, the tool wasn't image or a contract. It was direct pain. Because the director who did it knew his actor too well. He was his uncle. Her name was Angela. Angela Maxine O'Brien was born in 1937 in San Diego. Her father died before she was born. Her mother Gladys was left alone with her daughter. and with a very specific plan for her future. At 4, Angela was already acting. At 6, she was a star at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. At 7, she received a Special Academy Award for Young Performers. A little statuette in little hands, and all of Hollywood applauding. The public was sold the image of the perfect crying girl. Not just a cute kid, a kid who could cry so convincingly that adults in the audience would reach for their handkerchiefs. This skill was her main asset. And it was this that the industry learned to exploit with professional precision. But first, a small detail usually not highlighted in official biographies. The girl's name was Angela. Margaret was the name of the character in her first big role in the film Journey for Margaret. The role was a success. The studio decided the name sounded better and sold better. The name Angela was dropped. Posters, documents, public persona, everything was changed. From then on, she was Margaret. A 7-year-old girl had her name rewritten because it packaged the product better. Margaret got used to it. She had known only one thing since childhood: you have to conform. Cry when asked. Smile when needed. Be exactly who they expect you to be. Her mother was there on every set, watching the costume, the hair, making sure her daughter was ready for the take. On the set of Meet Me in St. Louis, the director needed real tears for a key scene. Margaret tried. The desired result didn't come. And then, according to available information about that production, one of the adults on set told her that her beloved dog had been killed. The tears were real. The camera was rolling. They got the take. Later it turned out the dog was alive. Everything was fine. Except the child had already lived through it for real. The grief was real. Just captured on film. And no one apologized. Just, good work, next scene. Here you see exactly how the studio worked with a child's emotional resources. Tears needed. A way to get them is found. The child's psychological state wasn't a matter of care, it was a variable in the production process. Mother on set? Yes, but her presence meant not protection, but quality control. If the director was happy, then everything was going right. MGM got everything it wanted from the image of Margaret O'Brien. Meet Me in St. Louis, with Judy Garland, became one of the highest-grossing films of 1944. For several years running, the studio put her name on posters, knowing the audience would come. The crying girl sold steadily. Then Margaret started getting older, and the image started failing. The teenage years didn't fit the commercial packaging. The delicate crying girl was turning into an ordinary teenager, and the studio wasn't interested in that. The contract wasn't renewed. No big roles were offered. The studio moved on to the next child. Margaret O'Brien lived a long life. She worked in theater, appeared occasionally in film and television, didn't turn her biography into a public complaint. Apparently, she held on to something that many on this list couldn't. Only no one ever gave her back the name Angela. They took the name, took the tears, took the childhood, packaged it as standard production practice, and felt not a moment's discomfort about it. In the next story, the same trick with the dog was used by a director who knew his actor better than anyone else. Because that director was his uncle, and he knew in advance exactly what to say to the boy to make the tears real. And he used that knowledge. By the time he was 9, Jackie Cooper had 8 or 9 bicycles. He didn't ask for them. They accumulated. Every time the director needed something difficult from the boy, tears, fear, real terror, a bicycle would appear on set. Instead of an explanation, instead of a conversation, instead of basic respect for a child. Tough scene? Here's a bike. Take not working? Another bike. Cooper later described this collection in the garage without malice, just as a fact. That's the scary part. By age 9, he'd already accepted this exchange as normal. Jackie Cooper joined our gang at 7, and within 2 years became the most recognizable kid in Hollywood. A face that could cry, get angry, and laugh in a way that made you forget. You're looking at a child, not an actor. The studios knew the value of that skill, and they knew how to get it. His uncle knew too. Norman Torog was a director and Cooper's maternal uncle. In 1931, he cast his nephew in the lead role of the film Skippy, a story about a boy and his dog. Torog knew exactly how this child worked. He'd watched him since infancy. He understood precisely what needed to be said or done to get the desired reaction, and he used it. During filming, a scene requiring genuine grief was needed. Cooper tried. It wasn't working. Torog tried a threat. Another boy was dressed in Skippy's costume, hinting that his nephew could be replaced. Tears came, but they were tears from the fear of losing the job, not from the grief within the scene. Torog needed something else. Then a guard approached Cooper right on set and informed him. Because of his bad acting, they'd had to take his dog away. He took the dog, led it off stage. A gunshot was fired in the air. The 9-year-old boy was convinced his dog had just been shot. The tears that followed were real. The camera was rolling. They got the take. Later, Cooper found out the dog was alive, and he was so distraught they gave him a sedative. His mother knew about it beforehand. She agreed. The phrase the director chose to trigger this mechanism became known as, "Don't shoot my dog." Cooper used it as the title of his autobiography, written in 1981, 50 years later. It was the most accurate thing he could find to describe his childhood. One episode, one phrase. It haunted him for 50 years. His uncle built the scene on trust. The child trusted his uncle, his own flesh and blood, and the uncle turned that knowledge into a production tool. Characteristically, the same film has another scene with real tears. Cooper's mother simply sat next to her son, explained what his character was going through, asked him to feel it with her. One take. No guns, no bicycles. Torog just didn't want to bother with that. The film Skippy came out in 1931. Cooper was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor. He was 9 years old. To this day, the youngest man in the history of that category. At the ceremony itself, he fell asleep on the lap of actress Marie Dressler. He lost. Nobody told him that night. He was just asleep. MGM signed Cooper when he was 10. Big films, famous co-stars. It seemed like, here it is, the next step. But the studio was buying a specific product, a boy who cried for real and made audiences hold their breath. When his voice started to change, when his face was no longer a child's, the studio simply didn't renew his contract. No explanation, no transition, no next step. Discarded as soon as the expiration date passed. Cooper grew up, became a director, won an award for directing episodes of MASH, played editor Perry White in Superman, and lived a long professional life. But when asked about his childhood, he told stories about the bicycles in the garage, about how by age 9 he already understood his feelings were a commodity, not his own property. His uncle never received forgiveness. Cooper wrote that plainly too. Some kids in this story at least knew who was pressuring them. The next one didn't. He was simply pulled from 500 others, told, "You're chosen," given a dog and a shooting schedule. And then they explained that his job was to make way for the one standing next to him on 4 legs. Out of 500 kids, they chose one. The producers of the new series, Lassie, auditioned 500 candidates and settled on 12-year-old Tommy Rettig. By then, he'd already appeared in 17 films, toured in theaters since age 6, and accompanied Marilyn Monroe to a movie premiere, because a producer decided so. 17 films by age 12. Everyone around thought this was a promising start. It was the ceiling. Lassie premiered in 1954 and immediately became one of the country's top Sunday shows. Tommy played Jeff Miller, the good boy alongside the good dog. The public loved it. Ratings held. Only the official star of the show was the collie, and the entire production logic was built around her. Camera angles, blocking, the order of takes. Everything was calculated for the animal. The boy had to move predictably and not throw the dog off its trainer's commands. Tommy got genuinely attached to the collie. They even let him take her home on weekends. Until the dog started obeying the boy instead of the trainer. Then the weekends were canceled. Friendship turned out to be a production asset. When it became a production problem, it was simply removed. 3 seasons. Then Tommy turned 15. His voice started to change, his face along with it. The studio did the math. Young viewers no longer identified with this teenager. They found John Provost, younger, smaller, more convenient. Tommy was asked to make room. No explanation, no transition period, no next step. The series continued for 16 more years after him. The episodes with Tommy went into television syndication under the title Jeff's Lassie. His face, his name in the title, his 3 years of work on screen. The studio got the money from reruns. Tommy didn't see a cent. Jeff Miller became a cage. At every audition, casting didn't see an actor with experience. They saw the boy from the Sunday Family Show. In 1973, Tommy went to director William Friedkin. He was making The Exorcist and looking for a teenage girl with the right inner intensity. The role went to someone else. 2 years later, an audition for Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Again, a role completely opposite to the Sunday Family Show. A street kid, harsh reality, nothing like Jeff Miller. Again, no. The role went to Jodie Foster. All this time, Tommy was working at a donut shop. At 18, money from a trust fund came through, about $200,000, set aside under the Coogan law. No profession, no support, no direction, just money and a name that closed every door in the industry. Then, an arrest in the early 70s for marijuana on a farm. The press printed a mugshot next to his childhood photo from the show. They presented the distance between them as a story of downfall. No one wrote that behind that distance were 3 years of working for a studio that took everything and left nothing in return. Then another arrest, then a divorce, then another arrest. In the mid-80s, Tommy sat down and taught himself programming, on his own, from scratch. He became a database specialist, gained a reputation in a completely different field that didn't care who Jeff Miller was. An unexpected turn for someone written off at 20, but that's exactly how he found his way out. He died at 54 from a heart attack in Marina del Rey. Quietly, without memoirs, without exposés. Somewhere in one of his later interviews, he said that by age 9, he'd already done it all. Film, theater, radio, television. Everyone around thought it was wonderful. He himself called it the murder of emotional development. His own word, not someone else's. In the next story, the system also handed a kid an image, fame, and a schedule 5 years in advance, and then cut it all off at once. Only there was no second chance in the form of a new profession. There was a licensed doctor with a prescription pad, 18 years old, and money that arrived with zero guidance. At 8, they gave her a rag doll with glasses and said, "Carry it everywhere." She did. 5 years, 138 episodes, every Sunday in prime time. Buffy Davis, with her doll Mrs. Beasley, became one of the main images of American family television in the 60s. A toy company released the doll for sale. Millions of units sold. Anissa Jones earned money from this image. The money went into a trust fund. She didn't think much about it. No one really asked her. The series Family Affair started in 1966 and was about 3 orphan children taken in by their bachelor uncle. Warm, cozy, a family coming together through love. Every week, a happy ending. While the camera rolled, there was a family. Off-screen, Anissa's parents were divorcing. Her mother Mildred was there on every set. Watched over her daughter, managed her schedule, ensured she was ready for the take. Her father left the family right around the time the show was airing. The girl who every week on screen lived out a family reunion under one roof came home to a house where the family was falling apart. The production calendar didn't account for this. The studio didn't account for this. The main thing was that the smile was in place the next day. And the smile was there. Where else could it go? 5 years, That's the entire conscious teenage period, from 8 to 13. No regular school, no peers, no normal schedule. Only the studio, filming, and the image of Buffy. When the series was canceled in 1971, Anissa found herself in a regular high school, at 13, with zero life skills. Classmates knew her from TV. They didn't know how to be friends with her. She didn't know how to be herself. She knew how to be Buffy. These are different things. Very different. Then she tried to do what many in this list attempted. Prove she wasn't just one image. She auditioned for director William Friedkin. He was making The Exorcist. The role, a 12-year-old girl in the darkest, farthest from Buffy film of the season. That's exactly what she needed. Friedkin chose another actress. 2 years later, an audition for Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Again, a role completely opposite to the Sunday family show. A street kid, harsh reality, nothing of Buffy Davis. Again, no. The role went to another actress. Casting saw the rag doll with glasses and couldn't see anything else. Between auditions, Anissa worked at a donut shop. The same girl whose face sold millions of dolls stood behind the counter. At 18, the trust fund was unfrozen. By law, the employer had set aside part of her earnings, and now that moment had come. About $200,000 went to a young woman with no profession, no support, no understanding of what to do with it. No one had prepared her for this money, just as no one had prepared her for life after the series. Money gave freedom, but freedom to do what wasn't clear. And then a doctor appeared. The doctor worked in Torrance. According to an investigation that ran parallel and independently, he was part of a scheme where prescriptions were written for money without real medical need. He prescribed Anissa Seconal, a barbiturate, a powerful sleeping pill, in batches of 50 tablets. On an envelope with his address, found at the scene of her death, her name was written, along with the dosage and quantity, 50 pills. A licensed physician, a legal prescription pad, an 18-year-old girl with money and no guidance. In late August of 1976, she was found unconscious in a house in Oceanside. In her system simultaneously, cocaine, angel dust, Seconal, Quaaludes. The coroner said that in his practice, he rarely saw such a severe combination. The death was ruled accidental. 6 days later, the doctor was arrested right in his office. He didn't live to see trial, died the same year. Anissa Jones lived 18 years. No trial, no accountability, just an obituary with a photo from the series and a headline about a fall. The same photos that sold dolls. Now they were selling a story about how far one could fall. In the next story, there was also money and also no accountability. Only there was no trust fund, no 18-year wait. There was a man over 30 who was owed $50 for someone else's dog. And it ended with a gunshot in someone else's living room, and the court called it self-defense. Carl Switzer wasn't looking for a career. The career found him on its own, in the studio commissary. 7-year-old Carl and his older brother Harold came from a small town in Illinois. Their mother brought them to California with one idea: let them act. They say one day both boys wandered onto the Hal Roach studio lot, went into the commissary, got something to eat, and started singing right there. Someone from the studio management heard them, and Carl ended up in our gang. The character was named Alfalfa. A cowlick, freckles, absolutely hopeless vocals, and deadly confidence to go with it. The humor was all in the gap between self-perception and reality. Audiences laughed. 5 years straight in almost every episode. Then Carl became a teenager. The studio moved on to the next kids. The official part was over. Then another part began. In 1955, the old Our Gang episodes were bought for television, renamed The Little Rascals, and put into daytime slots across the country. Every day, on every local channel. Millions of kids after school turned on the TV. There was Alfalfa. Carl was around 30. He was working as a bartender in the San Fernando Valley. His face was on TV every single day. The rights holders were making money. The studio was making money. The advertisers were making money. Carl didn't get a cent. The contract his mother signed in 1935 didn't provide for any share of revenue from reruns. Television didn't exist back then. The loophole simply wasn't closed. The Coogan law protected children from parents. From studio syndication? No. In the 18 years after Our Gang, Carl appeared in about 60 films. In almost all of them, uncredited. He was with Bob Hope, with Bing Crosby, played a slave in the 10 Commandments. 60 films, 0 posters. Alongside, he led hunting trips for tourists. Clients included Roy Rogers and Henry Fonda, the very same actors who starred in leading roles while Alfalfa worked as a mountain guide. In '58, he was wounded outside a bar under unclear circumstances. The same year, he attempted suicide. He survived both times. And then director Stanley Kramer gave him a real role in a serious film, The Defiant Ones, with Tony Curtis and Sidney Poitier. Not an extra, a character. His last paycheck hadn't arrived yet. Carl was waiting. On January 21, 1959, he went to see an acquaintance named Bud Stilts. Simple story. Carl had spent $50 getting Stilts' runaway hunting dog back, placed an ad, paid the finder, bought him a drink. In his logic, Stilts should reimburse the expenses. The conversation became an argument. The argument, a gunshot. Stilts' 14-year-old stepson was standing nearby and later told what he saw. Carl was already turning toward the exit when the shot was fired. The knife he supposedly pulled was found under his body, folded, blade retracted. The boy was never called to the hearing. The investigation ruled lawful self-defense. That same day, director Cecil B. DeMille died. The press ran loud obituaries. About Carl Switzer, they printed a paragraph inside. Alfalfa died for $50. And that was more understandable than everything Hollywood had done to him for 20 years before that. The next in this line also started in Our Gang, also grew up, also ended up unwanted. Only he didn't make it to someone else's living room. He made it to a room in a Hollywood hotel with a note on the table. What was in it? No one ever found out. At 3, he was noticed by an agent in a barber shop. Scotty Beckett's father was in the chair. His son was messing around nearby, and a strange man in the next chair handed over a business card. Said, "Your boy has something." His father called. That's how Hollywood found what it needed. By 6, Scotty had already left Our Gang and was moving on. By 12, he'd acted with Spencer Tracy, Norma Shearer, Judy Garland, and Cary Grant. Not in bit parts, in major family pictures alongside the first names of the studio era. MGM used him as a standard tool. Need a kid alongside an adult storyline? Here's Scotty Beckett, reliable, expressive, always ready for the take. Then came the Jolson story. 1946. A biographical film about singer Al Jolson. Scotty played him as a youth, a teenager in whom the future star was already visible. One of the highest-grossing films of that season. Critics specifically praised his part. He built the foundation on which the adult actor later played the legend. It seemed, here it was, the springboard. The studio saw it. The press saw it. Everyone expected the next step to be big. While they waited, his career quietly began to fall apart. MGM had used Scotty for 20 years as the kid alongside the leads. Didn't build an image, didn't plan a transition, didn't invest in the next phase. Just put him in the frame wherever a good boy was needed. When the good boy grew up, it turned out there was nothing to build an adult career from. No established type, no support, no position. Other actors his age were moving into leading roles. Scotty wasn't. The studio didn't explain why, just gave him fewer roles. Then even fewer. It wasn't a decision, it was silence, which said everything. In '54, he was cast in a TV series. Steady work, small, but at least something. A few months later he was fired. showed up on set drunk. In '57, he was detained at the Mexican border with 250 stimulant pills. He said, prescription, all legal. Didn't help. The same year, his wife filed for divorce, got custody of their son. After that, Scotty swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills. They pumped his stomach, released him. He tried to start again. 2 years later, arrested for 4 pills. Released after 12 hours. 4 days later, he crashed into a tree in West Los Angeles. Broke his hip and the base of his skull. Months on crutches. Then jail, 6 months. Then a psychiatric hospital. Then sleeping pills again. Survived again. In '67, he was driving an ambulance. Biographers later tried to explain why. Maybe to be closer to prescription drugs. Maybe because he once dreamed of being a doctor and studied at university until he had to drop out. Maybe just because there was nothing else left. The man who acted with Cary Grant at 13, at 37 was driving other people's patients on stretchers. On May 8, 1968, he checked into the Royal Palms Hotel in Hollywood, a place called a hotel, functioning as a boarding house for those with nowhere else to go. They say he arrived after a severe beating. The circumstances were never established. On May 10th, he was found dead in his room. Next to him were pills and a note. The coroner performed an autopsy. Conclusion: cause of death unknown. Not an overdose, not heart failure, just unknown. Too much had piled up in one person to pinpoint a single cause. The note was never published. What was in it? Never told. 38 years old. Around 80 rolls. Not one name on a marquee. After Scotty Beckett, only one remained in this line, and he had neither a note that could go unpublished nor a body that someone found right away. He wasn't found for over 18 months, because no one knew where to look, and because no one was looking. 2 children found him. They were playing in an abandoned building on East 10th Street in New York, went upstairs, and found a man on a cot. Next to him, 2 empty beer bottles and a stack of religious pamphlets. No identification, no name. Police showed the photo to neighbors. No one recognized him. The body was buried in an unmarked grave on Hart Island, the city cemetery for the unclaimed. They take those there who no one came for. It was Bobby Driscoll, 31 years old, the voice of Peter Pan. It started in a barber shop in 1943. His father was getting a haircut. His son was messing around nearby. An agent in the next chair handed over a business card. By 9, the lead role in Song of the South, one of the biggest box office films of that season. By 14, an exclusive contract with the country's largest film studio. The first boy ever offered one. Then Treasure Island, so dear to my heart. The Window, a thriller where a teenager isn't believed by adults when he tells the truth. In 1950, a Special Academy Award for Juvenile Performer. A statuette in the hands of a 14-year-old. It seemed like the beginning. It seemed. In '53, Peter Pan came out. Bobby voiced the lead character and served as a live model for the animators. They filmed him in harnesses on wires, studied his movements, copied every gesture. He was the body of the boy who wouldn't grow up. A few weeks after the film's release, the studio terminated his contract. The official reason? Acne. A teenager's face didn't match the image. The studio made family films for a specific audience, and the audience wanted a specific look. Bobby was growing up. That was his problem. The same week, his mother withdrew him from the studio's professional school, the only place that structured its schedule around his work. The studio closed one door, his mother closed the other. Simultaneously, the same week. He was 16. Then, television episodes, increasingly rare and minor. At 20, he left on his own, got married, had 3 children. An attempt at a normal life. At 24, a drug arrest, 6 months in jail. A psychiatric hospital. Divorce. The children stayed with their mother. By 30, he was in New York, in the circle of artist Andy Warhol, who gathered around him people who fit in nowhere else. That's not a metaphor. It's just the address he had then. In February of '68, he was arrested. For what? Documents don't specify. From somewhere out of that, he wrote to poet Allen Ginsberg, asked for money. Ginsberg was a stranger, just a public address for people with no other options. Whether there's a reply in the archives, unknown. On March 30th, he was found in that building. Cause of death, heart failure from chronic drug use. 31 years old, and a heart like an old man's. For over 18 months, no one knew where he was. Until his mother called the studio. His father was dying. She wanted to connect them. The studio helped make inquiries. Police matched fingerprints from a 1961 case with prints from the abandoned building. They matched. His father died before any meeting could happen. Bobby Driscoll's name is engraved on his father's headstone in California. He himself lies on Hart Island. His star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is still in its place. The general public learned of his death in 1972, when journalists were tracking down actors from Song of the South for press materials about a re-release. The film was making money again. That's why they found him. 10 stories, and the same pattern. Take a face while it's needed. Let it go without warning when it's no longer useful. Not out of cruelty. It's just that no one thought about what would come next. The next kid was already waiting in the hall. Hollywood didn't break children out of malice. It's important to understand that. There weren't people sitting there who woke up in the morning and thought, today will ruin another life. There were people sitting there who thought about box office returns, about contracts, about the next season. Children were a resource. As long as the resource worked, it was used. When it stopped, they got the next one. No cruelty, just logic. That's the real horror. The same pattern, 10 times in a row. Take a child, build an image around them, squeeze everything possible out of the image. When the image stops selling, let them go. Without warning, without preparation, without regret. The next one is already waiting in the hall. The next one is always waiting in the hall. Not one of these children chose the conditions, didn't choose the schedule, didn't choose what happened to the money, didn't choose when it would all end or how. They were told, millions love you. Not told, in a few years, we won't know your name. Now tell me honestly, do you think this has changed? The industry got a little more careful with its wording. Trust funds are now mandatory, thank Jackie Coogan. Working hours are limited. On paper, care. But the image is still built by the studio. The moment you stop being needed is still determined by others. And when that happens, you're still left alone with whatever's left of you. The algorithms changed. The pattern, no. 10 people from this collection went through the same door. Some came out the other side on their own. Some weren't found for over a year. But all of them were once those children the world adored, and who never asked for that adoration. They just lived in the only world they were shown. This isn't Hollywood's tragedy. This is the tragedy of people who happen to have Hollywood happen to them. And this was only one way the industry knows how to handle people. There are others. They're quieter, more sophisticated, and sometimes much worse. About that, next time.